The second miracle, Padre Pio heals a boy who had lost all hope of life. The emergency room's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Dr. Thompson's face as he delivered the verdict. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mitchell, but Matthew's condition has deteriorated beyond our capabilities. The bone tuberculosis has spread aggressively." Sarah Mitchell clutched her son's frail hand, watching his chest rise and fall with labored breaths. At just 12 years old, Matthew had already endured more pain than most adults. Through her tears, she caught a glimpse of Senator Armstrong's son slipping away down the corridor, his conscience as heavy as the weight of his father's influence that had sentenced her boy to death. Before tragedy struck the Mitchell family, life held a different kind of rhythm. The modest yellow house on Maple Street in Burlington, Vermont, had always been filled with the sound of Matthew's laughter and Sarah's gentle humming as she prepared their evening meals. A gifted student with bright blue eyes and an infectious smile, Matthew Mitchell had been the pride of Burlington Elementary, known for his talent in mathematics and kind heart that drew other children to him like moths to a flame. Sarah Mitchell, a dedicated nurse at Burlington General Hospital for 15 years, had raised Matthew alone since her husband's death in Afghanistan 7 years ago. The gold star hanging in their window reminded visitors of Captain James Mitchell's sacrifice, but inside their home, his memory lived on in Matthew's determination and Sarah's unwavering strength. Their tight-knit community admired how Sarah balanced single motherhood with her demanding career, never missing one of Matthew's science fairs or baseball games. The first signs appeared subtly: Matthew's occasional limping after baseball practice, the unexplained fevers that came and went, and the gradual loss of appetite that Sarah initially attributed to preteen growing pains. As a nurse, she should have recognized the symptoms sooner, but love often blinds us to what we fear most. By the time the diagnosis came, aggressive bone tuberculosis, the disease had already begun its merciless advance through Matthew's young body. Their world shifted dramatically when Senator Armstrong's son, Thomas, drove through a red light while intoxicated, striking Matthew as he crossed the street outside the hospital, where he had just finished another round of preliminary tests. The impact sent him flying 20 feet, compromising his already weakened skeletal system and accelerating the disease's progression. The accident, which should have made headlines, disappeared from police records within hours. Sarah's colleagues at Burlington General watched in silent horror as hospital administration began systematically denying Matthew the specialized care he desperately needed. Insurance claims were mysteriously denied, specialist referrals disappeared, and treatment options suddenly became unavailable. The same halls where Sarah had spent years saving others' lives became a maze of closed doors and averted eyes. The tight-knit community that had once embraced them began to fracture under the pressure of Senator Armstrong's influence. Neighbors who had shared holiday meals with them now crossed the street to avoid conversation. Matthew's teachers, who had once praised his brilliant mind, now spoke in whispers about unfortunate circumstances and limited resources. The isolation grew as thick as the Vermont winter snow that piled outside their windows. Yet through it all, Matthew's spirit remained unbroken. Even as the disease confined him to a wheelchair and then to his bed, he continued to solve complex math problems in his head, explaining the solutions to his mother with enthusiasm that belied his failing health. "Mum," he would say during their long nights together, "did you know that even infinite numbers have patterns? Nothing is truly random." These moments of clarity between increasingly frequent periods of pain became Sarah's anchors in the storm. Sarah sold everything of value, her car, her jewelry, even her late husband's military memorabilia, to fund Matthew's treatments. She worked double shifts when she could still find hospitals that would employ her, earning suspicious dismissals each time Senator Armstrong's network discovered her presence. The gold star in their window, once a symbol of pride, now seemed to mock their current battles, as if one family's sacrifice for their country wasn't enough for the powers that be. Their only remaining allies were Dr. James Cooper, a young resident who secretly provided medical supplies and advice during his off hours, and Mrs. Anderson, their elderly neighbor who stubbornly brought soup every Sunday, declaring that no amount of political pressure could stop a grandmother's cooking. These small acts of kindness shone like stars in their increasingly dark world, reminding them that even in the depths of corruption, humanity could still flicker to life. As Matthew's condition deteriorated, Sarah found herself standing at his bedside each night, watching his labored breathing and whispering prayers into the darkness. The same hands that had once changed bandages with professional precision now trembled as they stroked his forehead, fighting against both disease and a system determined to silence them. In these quiet moments she would remember her husband's last words to her. Sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought on the battlefield. She never imagined those words would become their daily reality in the very country he died protecting. Senator Richard Armstrong's power in Vermont politics had been absolute for nearly 2 decades. From his pristine colonial mansion overlooking Lake Champlain, he orchestrated a web of influence that touched every major institution in the state. His son, Thomas Armstrong, at 25, embodied the worst aspects of privileged upbringing, a Yale dropout with 3 previous degrees, each mysteriously vanishing from court records before proceedings could begin. Burlington General Hospital's transformation under the Armstrong influence had been subtle but profound. Chief Administrator Patricia Wells, a former campaign donor, had risen to her position through careful political maneuvering rather than medical expertise. The hospital's board meetings, once focused on patient care, now revolved around political considerations and profitable partnerships. Doctors learned to look the other way when certain patients received preferential treatment, while others found their files mysteriously misplaced. The corruption ran deeper than mere hospital politics. Local media outlets, dependent on Armstrong-connected advertising revenue, crafted their coverage to please their benefactors. The Burlington Daily Press, once known for investigative journalism, now produced sanitized stories that read like campaign advertisements. Editor-in-Chief Michael Henderson's daughter's college tuition was fully funded by a mysterious scholarship from the Armstrong Family Foundation. Thomas Armstrong's lifestyle embodied this systemic corruption. His regular haunt, the exclusive Lakeside Club, served him drinks well past legal hours. Local police had standing orders to provide him with courtesy rides. Home when he was too intoxicated to drive, though on the night he hit Matthew, no such service was available. The responding officers that night were quickly reassigned to distant precincts, their incident reports sealed under the guise of ongoing investigation. Within the hospital's administrative offices, Patricia Wells orchestrated a campaign of subtle intimidation against Sarah Mitchell. Whispers about psychiatric instability and potential substance abuse began circulating among staff. Sarah's personnel file grew thick with minor infractions and questionable patient complaints, all meticulously documented after Matthew's accident. Longtime colleagues began distancing themselves, fearing professional repercussions by association. The Armstrong family's influence extended into the local justice system. Judge William Crawford, who had dismissed 2 of Thomas's previous DUI cases, was a regular guest at the senator's private fundraising events. The state medical board, responsible for hospital oversight, included 3 members who had received significant campaign contributions from Armstrong-affiliated PACs. Even the local church leadership treaded carefully, their building renovation fund heavily dependent on Armstrong family donations. Senator Armstrong himself maintained a carefully crafted public image of benevolent leadership. His press appearances highlighted charitable donations and community initiatives, while his private actions ensured his family's immunity from consequences. His wife, Eleanor Armstrong, chaired several prominent hospital boards, her presence ensuring compliance with family interests while maintaining a veneer of philanthropic concern. The system they built was designed to be impenetrable. Each layer of influence reinforced the others, creating a structure where justice became a commodity to be bought and sold. When Thomas's accident threatened to expose this carefully constructed facade, the machine moved with practiced precision to contain the damage. Medical records were altered, witnesses were pressured, and the media was carefully managed to minimize exposure. Yet beneath this display of power, cracks were beginning to show. Young Dr. Cooper wasn't the only one growing uncomfortable with the hospital's ethical compromises. A small group of nurses had begun documenting irregularities in patient care. Several junior reporters at the Burlington Daily Press were quietly gathering evidence of systemic corruption. Even within the Armstrong inner circle, consciences were stirring, particularly among those who had witnessed Matthew's deteriorating condition. The power structure that Senator Armstrong had built now faced its greatest test not from external investigations or political opponents, but from the simple, undeniable truth of a dying child's suffering. The same system that had protected his son for years now worked to suppress the consequences of his actions, but the weight of this particular cover-up was beginning to strain even the strongest loyalties. As Matthew's condition worsened, the question hanging over Burlington's power elite was no longer if their carefully constructed system would crack, but when and who would be caught in the collapse. The night that changed everything started like any other at Burlington General. Sarah had wheeled Matthew to his routine blood work appointment, his fragile frame already weakened by months of battling bone tuberculosis. The autumn wind whipped fallen leaves across the parking lot as they emerged from the hospital's side entrance at dusk. Matthew had managed a weak smile, commenting on how the swirling leaves reminded him of the mathematical patterns he loved so much. The screech of tires came without warning. Thomas Armstrong's black SUV careened through the red light, swerving erratically across lanes. Sarah's nurse instincts took over. She tried to push Matthew's wheelchair out of the path, but physics and fate had other plans. The impact sent Matthew flying from his wheelchair, his already compromised body crumpling against the cold asphalt. The sound of his bones breaking would haunt Sarah's dreams for months to come. Thomas Armstrong stumbled out of his vehicle, reeking of expensive whiskey and entitlement. "Do you know who my father is?" he slurred, pulling out his phone instead of offering help. Within minutes, a black sedan appeared and men in suits emerged to manage the situation. They approached Sarah as she cradled Matthew's unconscious form, their voices low and threatening. "Mrs. Mitchell, we can make this very easy or very difficult. The senator is prepared to be generous." The next 48 hours became a blur of intimidation and manipulation. Hospital security footage malfunctioned during the crucial minutes. Witness statements vanished from police records. Dr. Patricia Wells personally visited Sarah in Matthew's recovery room, armed with documents and a practiced smile. "We understand this is difficult," she said, sliding over a settlement agreement. "But think about Matthew's ongoing care. The senator can ensure he receives the best treatment or none at all." The offered sum was substantial enough to cover Matthew's immediate medical needs, but it came with demands complete silence, a signed statement absolving Thomas Armstrong of responsibility, and Sarah's resignation from the hospital. When Sarah hesitated, the threats became more explicit. Photos appeared on her phone: Matthew at school, their house at night, her late husband's grave. The message was clear: cooperation or consequences. Local police detective Mark Rodriguez attempted to investigate, but found himself stonewalled at every turn. "Mrs. Mitchell," he confided during a brief hospital visit, "they've buried this so deep I can't even file a preliminary report. My captain received a call from the senator himself." The next day, Rodriguez was transferred to traffic duty in a remote county precinct. The media blackout was immediate and complete. The Burlington Daily Press ran a small article about a minor accident in the hospital parking lot, buried on page 6. When Sarah attempted to contact other news outlets, she discovered that every major publication in Vermont had connections to Armstrong family interests. Local TV stations suddenly became unavailable for interviews, their news directors citing scheduling conflicts. The hospital's response was equally orchestrated. Matthew's original medical records documenting both his tuberculosis and accident injuries were replaced with sanitized versions. New doctors, handpicked by administration, began suggesting that Matthew's condition was pre-existing, and unrelated to any recent trauma insurance claims were denied based on these altered records. Dr. James Cooper, witnessing this systematic corruption, tried to help by secretly preserving copies of Matthew's original medical files. "This isn't right," he whispered to Sarah during a midnight shift. "They're not just covering up the accident, they're actively blocking his treatment to force your compliance." The next day, Cooper received a letter detailing every payment left on his substantial medical school loans, along with a reminder of his employment contract's confidentiality clauses. The corruption's tendrils reached even into the spiritual realm. Father Michael Bennett, their longtime family priest, was quietly reminded of the Armstrong family's generous contributions to the church's building fund. His usual Sunday visits to Matthew's hospital room became less frequent, eventually stopping altogether. The isolation grew more profound as each support system was systematically dismantled. Within a week of the accident, Sarah found herself completely alone in her fight against both the disease consuming her son and the system determined to silence them. Matthew's condition deteriorated rapidly, the trauma from the accident accelerating the tuberculosis's progression. Each labored breath seemed to whisper accusations against a system that valued power over justice, wealth over compassion. The aftermath of the accident unleashed a cascade of hardships that tested the Mitchell family's endurance. Sarah's forced resignation from Burlington General left them without medical insurance, and her attempts to find work at other hospitals were mysteriously thwarted. Each application ended with the same polite rejection: "We regret to inform you that the position has been filled." The Armstrong influence cast a long shadow across Vermont's medical community, and their financial situation deteriorated rapidly. Medical bills mounted like the autumn leaves outside Matthew's window, each one a reminder of their growing desperation. Sarah began selling their possessions, first the non-essentials, then family heirlooms, and finally her wedding ring. The gold star flag, commemorating her husband's sacrifice, remained their last treasure, though even that felt like it might soon be sacrificed on the altar of Matthew's survival. The community's response revealed both the depth of human compassion and the power of fear. Mrs. Anderson, their elderly neighbor, continued her Sunday soup deliveries despite anonymous phone calls warning her to mind her own business. A few of Matthew's former teachers made furtive visits, smuggling in books and homework assignments, though they could no longer openly advocate for him at school board meetings. Dr. James Cooper faced his own battles for helping them. Anonymous complaints appeared in his personnel file. His parking privileges were revoked. Operating room schedules were adjusted to minimize his hours. Yet he persisted, secretly monitoring Matthew's care during his off hours and documenting the hospital's suspicious practices. "Sometimes doing nothing is the same as doing wrong," he told Sarah during one of his clandestine visits. The local pharmacy, under pressure from unnamed sources, suddenly couldn't fill Matthew's prescriptions due to supply issues. Sarah found herself driving to neighboring towns, using different pharmacies each time, paying out of pocket for medications that should have been covered. Each trip drained their dwindling savings, but Matthew's need for pain management left no alternative. Underground support began to emerge. A network of nurses, coordinated through encrypted messages, helped track down needed medical supplies. Restaurant workers slipped extra food into Sarah's takeout orders. A mysterious envelope containing cash appeared in their mailbox every few weeks, though its source remained anonymous. These small acts of defiance against the Armstrong machine provided sparks of hope in their darkening world. Matthew's condition continued its relentless decline, accelerated by the accident's trauma. The bone tuberculosis, finding new pathways through his injured body, caused increasing pain that even the strongest available medications struggled to manage. Yet his spirit remained remarkably resilient. Between bouts of fever and pain, he worked on complex math problems, telling his mother that numbers were the one thing the Armstrongs couldn't control. The isolation grew more profound as winter approached. Former friends crossed the street to avoid conversations. Neighbors drew their curtains when Sarah's car passed. The Sunday church service, once a source of comfort, became an exercise in avoided gazes and whispered judgments. The Armstrong family's front row pew served as a weekly reminder of power's ability to corrupt even sacred spaces. Local journalists who attempted to investigate found themselves reassigned or unemployed. One persistent reporter from the Burlington Daily Press, Jessica Martinez, managed to publish a small article questioning the accident's official narrative. The next day, the paper ran a full retraction and apology. Martinez's desk was empty by noon. In the midst of this systematic isolation, Sarah discovered her own strength. She began keeping detailed records of every interaction, every denied claim, every suspicious circumstance. Her nursing background proved invaluable as she documented Matthew's declining health with professional precision. Though she had no clear plan for using this information, the act of recording their struggle felt like a small victory against the forces arrayed against them. The breaking point came when Matthew's latest test results revealed the disease's acceleration. The young doctor who delivered the news, his eyes full of genuine concern, quietly suggested they seek help outside Vermont. "There are facilities in other states," he whispered, checking over his shoulder. Places beyond the senator's reach. He was terminated the next day, but his words planted a seed of hope in Sarah's mind. Hope arrived in the form of a worn magazine left anonymously on their doorstep one freezing Vermont morning. The pages were dog-eared, marked with coffee stains, but the article about Padre Pio's healing miracles remained clearly legible. Sarah found herself drawn to the stories of seemingly impossible recoveries, particularly one about a young boy with an incurable condition who found healing through the saint's intervention. Dr. James Cooper, making one of his secret visits, discovered Sarah poring over the article late that night. "I've heard of him," he whispered, checking to ensure Matthew was asleep. "There's a growing number of documented cases that science can't explain. My colleague in Boston just returned from San Giovanni Rotondo. He's seen things that defy medical explanation." He pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper with contact information and instructions for reaching the monastery. The logistics seemed impossible at first. Matthew's condition required constant medical attention, and their financial resources were nearly depleted. Yet pieces began falling into place in ways that felt almost miraculous. A network of underground supporters emerged, coordinated through Dr. Cooper's medical connections. An anonymous donor provided airline tickets. A group of nurses from neighboring hospitals arranged a schedule to provide medical care during the journey. Mrs. Anderson, their elderly neighbor, broke the community's silence by openly declaring her support. "My Harold was healed by Padre Pio in '52, she announced during Sunday service, loud enough for the Armstrong family to hear. "And I'll help this boy get there too, senator or no senator." Her declaration inspired others to quietly step forward. Former patients Sarah had cared for, parents of Matthew's classmates, and even a few hospital staff began offering small contributions. The underground movement grew stronger. Local mechanics volunteered to repair Sarah's car for free. A retired pilot offered advice about medical transport regulations. A group of Matthew's former teachers created a private online fundraiser, careful to keep it off the Armstrong family's radar. Each small act of defiance against the system brought new allies to their cause. Dr. Cooper worked tirelessly behind the scenes, preparing detailed medical documentation that would be needed for international travel. He coordinated with Italian medical facilities, arranged for oxygen supplies during the flight, and developed contingency plans for every possible complication. His professional reputation hung by a thread, but as he told Sarah, some things are worth risking everything for. The most unexpected support came from Thomas Armstrong's former girlfriend, Rebecca Taylor. She contacted Sarah through a secure channel, offering testimony about Thomas's history of drunk driving and his father's systematic cover-ups. "I can't live with this anymore," she confided. "What happened to Matthew? It's just the tip of the iceberg." Her information provided crucial leverage against potential interference with their travel plans. News of their planned journey leaked despite their precautions. The Armstrong machine sprang into action but found their usual tactics, less effective against this dispersed network of supporters. When they pressured the travel agency, 3 others offered services. When they threatened Dr. Cooper's medical license, a dozen other doctors stepped forward to provide backup documentation. Each attempt at suppression seemed to strengthen the resolve of those helping the Mitchells. Sarah noticed subtle changes in the community's atmosphere. People began making eye contact again. Small gifts appeared on their porch: home-cooked meals, hand-knit blankets, cards filled with encouragement. The wall of silence imposed by the Armstrongs developed hairline cracks. Even Father Bennett, after weeks of avoiding them, made a discreet visit to offer his blessing for their journey. Matthew's response to these developments marked the first positive change in months. His interest in the world around him rekindled as he read about Padre Pio and San Giovanni Rotondo. He began calculating flight times and time zones, turning their desperate journey into a mathematical adventure. "Mom," he said one evening, his eyes brighter than they'd been in weeks, "did you know the probability of all these people helping us is astronomically small? It's like the universe is solving an equation we couldn't figure out." The Armstrong family's response to the Mitchells' plans came swiftly and brutally. One evening, as Sarah returned from picking up Matthew's medications, 3 men emerged from the shadows of their front porch. The attack was quick and calculated: no marks above the neck, nothing that would draw immediate attention, but enough to send a clear message. They left her gasping on the ground, her ribs bruised and her travel documents scattered in the wind. The hospital suddenly discovered irregularities in Matthew's medical records that would make international travel dangerous, if not impossible. Dr. Patricia Wells held a press conference expressing grave concerns about the risks of moving a patient in Matthew's condition. Local media outlets dutifully reported these medical opinions, carefully avoiding any mention of Padre Pio or the community's support for the Mitchells. Dr. Cooper's carefully prepared medical documentation disappeared from his office during a suspicious break-in. His computer was wiped clean, and his backup files were corrupted. The next day he received photos of his teenage daughter walking to school, accompanied by a note asking if he was prepared to risk his family's safety for the Mitchells. The young doctor spent a sleepless night wrestling with his conscience before showing up at the Mitchells' door at dawn, more determined than ever to help. The harassment escalated. Their phone lines were frequently disconnected. Their internet service became unreliable. Sarah's car developed mysterious problems: cut brake lines one day, sugar in the gas tank the next. Each incident was carefully designed to appear random while carrying an unmistakable threat. Local police filed reports but took no action, their hands tied by invisible strings of political influence. Matthew's condition worsened under the stress. His fever spiked dangerously, and the pain became almost unbearable. During one particularly bad night, as Sarah held her son's trembling body, she found herself questioning whether their hope in Padre Pio was worth the cost. It was Matthew who reinforced her resolve, whispering through his pain, "Mom, even parallel lines meet at infinity. Nothing is impossible." The breakthrough in their situation came from an unexpected source. Jessica Martinez, the fired journalist, had continued her investigation independently. She uncovered a pattern of similar incidents: other families threatened, other accidents covered up, other lives destroyed by the Armstrong family's influence. Working with a national news network, she prepared to break the story, providing the Mitchells with leverage they desperately needed. The hospital conspiracy began unraveling when a junior administrator, conscience-stricken after witnessing Matthew's suffering, leaked internal emails documenting the systematic suppression of the Mitchells' insurance claims. The emails revealed direct communication between Senator Armstrong's office and hospital administration, explicitly discussing ways to pressure the family into silence. Sarah's assault proved to be a tactical error by the Armstrong machine. Mrs. Anderson had witnessed the attack from her window, and despite her age, recorded it on her phone with trembling hands. The footage, while grainy, clearly showed the assailants emerging from a car registered to one of the senator's known associates. The video began circulating through encrypted channels, building pressure behind the scenes. Local law enforcement's complicity became harder to maintain. Detective Rodriguez, though relegated to traffic duty, had continued gathering evidence. He compiled a comprehensive file documenting the department's deliberate negligence in investigating crimes against the Mitchells. When his superior demanded he surrender the file, Rodriguez instead sent copies to both federal authorities and trusted journalists. The most devastating blow to the Armstrong family's efforts came from within their own ranks. Thomas Armstrong, haunted by nightmares of the accident and Matthew's suffering, began drinking even more heavily. During one drunken episode at the Lakeside Club, he loudly confessed his guilt to a crowded room. Though the family quickly whisked him away to a private rehabilitation facility, his words had found too many ears to be effectively suppressed. All these threads, the assault footage, leaked emails, police documents, and Thomas's confession created a web of evidence that even Senator Armstrong's influence couldn't entirely contain. The pressure built steadily, creating small but significant gaps in the wall of opposition to the Mitchells' planned journey. Through these gaps, hope continued to find its way to their door, carried by a growing network of allies determined to see justice done. The journey to Padre Pio began in the pre-dawn darkness of a bitter Vermont winter morning. A convoy of 3 cars, organized by Dr. Cooper, transported the Mitchells and their medical supplies through back roads to avoid potential interference. Matthew, wrapped in blankets and sustained by portable oxygen, used his mathematical mind to track their progress. "Mom," he whispered through labored breaths, "we're moving at an average speed of 47 miles per hour, accounting for back routes. We'll reach Boston in approximately 3.4 hours. The first major challenge came at Boston Logan International Airport. Despite Dr. Cooper's meticulous preparation of medical clearance documents, airline staff initially hesitated to board a passenger in Matthew's condition. It took the intervention of an unexpected ally, a senior flight attendant whose own son had been healed at San Giovanni Rotondo years earlier, to clear the bureaucratic hurdles. She personally guaranteed Matthew's safety during the flight, rearranging seat assignments to create a makeshift medical space in first class. Their support network had grown beyond Vermont's borders. A group of Catholic nurses in Boston, coordinated through Mrs. Anderson's church connections, provided additional medical supplies and updated documentation. A former military medic, recognizing the gold star pin Sarah still wore, offered his expertise in managing medical emergencies during long flights. Each helper seemed to appear precisely when needed, like pieces of a divine puzzle falling into place. The flight across the Atlantic tested everyone's endurance. Matthew's condition deteriorated in the pressurized cabin, requiring constant monitoring and adjustment of his oxygen levels. Sarah watched her son's face in the dim cabin light, remembering how he once explained that air pressure decreases exponentially with altitude. Even in his pain, his mind continued to find patterns and equations in their journey. A young Italian doctor, returning home from a conference, offered his assistance during particularly difficult moments, teaching Sarah crucial Italian medical terms they might need. Rebecca Taylor's testimony about the Armstrong family's corruption had been strategically released to select media outlets just as their plane took off. This timing was crucial. By the time Senator Armstrong's team realized the Mitchells had left the country, the story was already gaining traction. Jessica Martinez's comprehensive investigation, published simultaneously in several national newspapers, provided damaging context to Rebecca's revelations. Their arrival in Rome brought new challenges and unexpected grace. The Italian medical transport team, arranged by Dr. Cooper's international contacts, moved Matthew with gentle efficiency to a waiting ambulance. An elderly nun from a local convent, who spoke perfect English, appeared to guide them through the complex Italian medical bureaucracy. "God's timing is perfect," she said with a knowing smile, producing necessary permits that would have taken days to obtain through normal channels. The drive to San Giovanni Rotondo became a journey through both physical and spiritual landscapes. Matthew, the weak, marveled at the mathematical symmetry in the Italian countryside's terraced hills. Local families, hearing of their arrival through the mysterious networks that seemed to surround Padre Pio, left food and flowers at each stop along their route. Their story had traveled ahead of them, carried by what Italians called the telephone of God. Dr. Cooper's daily updates from Vermont arrived through secure channels, reporting both increasing pressure and growing support. The hospital board was divided, with several members questioning the Armstrong family's influence for the first time. The leaked evidence had sparked multiple investigations, and public opinion was shifting rapidly. Even Father Bennett had found his voice, delivering a sermon about David and Goliath that left no doubt about his allegiance. The Italian medical team monitoring Matthew noticed subtle changes as they approached San Giovanni Rotondo. His fever, which had raged for months, began to fluctuate in an unusual pattern. The lead doctor, a skeptic of religious healing, found himself documenting unexplainable improvements in Matthew's vital signs. In 30 years of practice, he confided to Sarah, "I have never seen anything like this." As they climbed the winding road to the monastery, Matthew gripped his mother's hand with unexpected strength. "Mom," he said, his voice clearer than it had been in weeks, "do you remember what Dad used to say about impossible things?" Sarah nodded, tears flowing freely. "He said they're just math problems we haven't solved yet." The ancient bells of San Giovanni Rotondo began to toll, their mathematical precision marking the hours as they had for centuries, welcoming another soul seeking healing against impossible odds. Back in Vermont, Senator Armstrong's carefully constructed world was unraveling. The combined impact of Rebecca Taylor's testimony and Jessica Martinez's investigation created a media firestorm that even his considerable influence couldn't contain. National news networks descended on Burlington, their satellite trucks lining the streets outside Burlington General Hospital. Each hour brought new revelations, each more damaging than the last. The senator launched a desperate counter-offensive. His Puerto Rico team worked overtime, spinning narratives about troubled former employees spreading lies, about a grieving mother's unfortunate delusions, about a hospital doing its best in difficult circumstances. But this time, the usual tactics fell flat. Too many witnesses had come forward, too many documents had leaked, too many voices were speaking truth to power. Thomas Armstrong's rehabilitation facility became an unexpected focal point of the drama. Despite heavy security, he managed to make contact with a sympathetic nurse who recorded his full confession. Through tears and trembling hands, he detailed not just the accident that injured Matthew, but years of similar incidents covered up by his father's influence. The recording, released anonymously to multiple news outlets, sent shockwaves through Vermont's political establishment. Dr. Patricia Wells found herself facing a rebellion within her own hospital. Junior doctors, inspired by Dr. Cooper's example, began speaking openly about cases where treatment had been denied or altered due to political pressure. Nurses compiled records of suspicious pattern changes in patient care. Even the hospital's janitorial staff contributed evidence of late-night document shredding sessions in the administrative offices. The Armstrong family's allies began jumping ship. Judge Crawford, facing scrutiny over his dismissal of previous cases, recused himself from all Armstrong-related matters and announced his early retirement. The state medical board launched an internal investigation into their own oversight practices. Local business leaders, sensing the shifting winds, publicly distanced themselves from the senator's charitable foundation. Jessica Martinez's investigation expanded beyond Vermont's borders, uncovering similar patterns of corruption in neighboring states. Her reporting revealed a complex network of political influence extending through multiple hospital systems, insurance companies, and regulatory bodies. The story grew from a local scandal to a regional expose of healthcare corruption, drawing attention from federal investigators. The church community, led by a newly emboldened Father Bennett, became an unexpected center of resistance. Sunday sermons across Burlington began addressing themes of justice and healing. Prayer groups formed specifically to support the Mitchells' journey to Padre Pio. The Armstrong family's front row pew remained conspicuously empty as congregation members openly discussed the family's actions. Detective Rodriguez, working with federal authorities, methodically built a criminal case. The assault on Sarah Mitchell proved to be a crucial turning point. The grainy footage from Mrs. Anderson's phone matched with cell tower data, vehicle registrations, and bank records to create an undeniable chain of evidence leading back to the senator's office. Each piece of the puzzle strengthened the case against the Armstrong machine. Public opinion shifted dramatically as more personal stories emerged. Other families came forward with similar experiences of intimidation and cover-ups. Former hospital employees shared accounts of being fired for questioning suspicious practices. Local pharmacists admitted to being pressured to deny prescriptions. The pattern of corruption became impossible to ignore or explain away. The most damaging blow came from Eleanor Armstrong herself. The senator's wife, shaken by the extent of the revelations and her son's suffering, contacted Sarah's legal team. In a sworn statement, she detailed years of watching her husband and his associates manipulate the healthcare system for political gain. Her testimony, coming from within the Armstrong family's inner circle, provided the final piece needed to dismantle the corrupt system her husband had built. International media began picking up the story, drawing parallels between Matthew's journey to Padre Pio and the broader fight against systemic corruption. Italian newspapers, particularly those following the Mitchells' progress towards San Giovanni Rotondo, portrayed their story as a modern-day David versus Goliath. The contrast between the powerful Armstrong machine and a mother's desperate fight for her son's life captured global attention. As Sarah and Matthew approached their destination in Italy, the system that had nearly destroyed them was crumbling under the weight of its own corruption. Dr. Cooper sent a final update before their scheduled meeting with Padre Pio. The truth has done what we couldn't. It's brought down the whole house of cards. Come home to a different Burlington whenever you're ready. Just focus on Matthew now. The justice you sought is taking care of itself. The dawn at San Giovanni Rotondo broke with a stillness that seemed almost supernatural. The morning mist clung to the ancient monastery walls as Sarah wheeled Matthew through the weathered stone archway. Pilgrims had been gathering since midnight, their whispered prayers creating a gentle symphony in the cool morning air. Matthew, his face pale but alert, clutched the mathematical equations he had been working on during their journey, his way of maintaining control in a world of uncertainties. Sister Maria Angelica, who had been assigned to guide them, appeared silently beside their group. Her eyes, wise with years of witnessing both suffering and miracles, took in Matthew's condition with gentle understanding. Padre Pio sees the most serious cases first, she explained softly, leading them through the crowd. He has been expecting you. Sarah wondered how this could be possible. They had told no one of their exact arrival time. The waiting area outside Padre Pio's confessional was thick with anticipation. The air felt charged, as if static electricity danced between the ancient stones. Matthew's medical team, consisting of the Italian doctor who had accompanied them and a local nurse, monitored his vitals with professional concern. His fever had spiked again during the night, and his breathing was more labored than usual. "The journey has weakened him," the doctor murmured, adjusting the oxygen flow. When Padre Pio's door finally opened, the crowd fell into complete silence. Sarah had read countless descriptions of the saint, but nothing had prepared her for his actual presence. He stood in the doorway, his stigmata-marked hands partially hidden in his sleeves, his penetrating gaze immediately finding Matthew in the crowd. Without a word being spoken, attendants began clearing a path for them. The first meeting was brief but intense. Padre Pio placed his hands on Matthew's head, speaking in a mixture of Italian and Latin that Sarah couldn't understand. But Matthew, whose eyes had been dulled by months of pain, suddenly focused with startling clarity. "Mum," he whispered, "he's solving an equation I've been working on, but it's not about math anymore." Padre Pio spoke to them through Sister Maria Angelica, who translated his words. The boy has carried not just his illness, but the weight of others' sins. His suffering has purpose. Though this is hard for a mother's heart to accept, you have fought against great evil to bring him here. Both battles for his body and for justice are being heard in heaven. The saint then did something unexpected. He asked Matthew about his mathematical calculations. Through the translator, they engaged in a discussion about patterns and probability. Padre Pio spoke of divine mathematics, of how grace follows rules more precise than any human equation. Matthew listened with rapt attention, his pain seemingly forgotten, as they discussed concepts that bridged the physical and spiritual worlds. The meeting ended with Padre Pio giving specific instructions. Matthew was to attend his Mass the next morning, and then return for a longer private session. Prepare yourself, but he told Sarah through the translator, for God works in patterns you cannot calculate. The healing has already begun, but not in the way you expect. As they left the confessional, the Italian doctor pulled Sarah aside, his professional skepticism warring with what his instruments were telling him. Matthew's vital signs had stabilized during the brief encounter, his oxygen levels improving for the first time in months. More striking was his mental clarity. The fog of pain medication seemed to have lifted temporarily, allowing his natural intelligence to shine through. That evening, in their small room near the monastery, Matthew worked feverishly on new equations. "Mom, I think I understand now," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Padre Pio showed me that miracles aren't breaks in the pattern, they're part of a bigger equation we usually can't see." He fell asleep clutching his notebook, and for the first time in months, his rest was peaceful, uninterrupted by pain. Sarah spent the night in prayer, her mind returning to Vermont and the chaos they had left behind. Dr. Cooper's latest message reported that federal investigators had seized hospital records and Senator Armstrong's political empire was crumbling. But here, in the presence of something far greater than political power, those battles seemed distant. Tomorrow would bring Matthew's second meeting with Padre Pio, and with it, perhaps the miracle they had traveled so far to find. The pre-dawn Mass began in an atmosphere of hushed expectation. Matthew, positioned near the altar in his wheelchair, remained unusually alert despite his exhaustion. The ancient chapel filled with the scent of incense as Padre Pio emerged to begin the service. Sarah noticed that her son's eyes never left the saint, as if they were engaged in some silent, profound communication that transcended the barriers of language and physical space. During the consecration, something extraordinary occurred. As Padre Pio elevated the host, Matthew suddenly gripped his mother's hand with unexpected strength. His body, which had been ravaged by both disease and injury, began to tremble visibly. The Italian doctor, stationed discreetly nearby, moved forward in professional concern, but Sister Maria Angelica gently held him back. "Watch," she whispered, "and remember everything you see." The transformation began subtly at first. Color returned to Matthew's pale cheeks, and his breathing, which had been shallow and labored for months, deepened and steadied. The doctor, unable to resist his medical training, quietly checked Matthew's pulse, his eyes widening at what he found. Later, he would document that the boy's vital signs had normalized in a way that defied medical explanation. After Mass, Padre Pio requested a private meeting with Matthew. This time he spoke directly to the boy in English, a fact that startled everyone present. "Your equations were right," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "God's mathematics are perfect, and you have been part of a larger calculation. Your suffering has not been pointless, it has been multiplied, like loaves and fishes, to feed many souls with hope." The saint then revealed something that sent chills through those present. He described, in precise detail, the night of Matthew's accident, including details that had never been made public. He spoke of Senator Armstrong's son, of the corruption in Burlington, and of the souls being transformed through this ordeal. "Your pain," he told Matthew, "has become a catalyst for healing not just your body, but an entire community's spirit." As they talked, Matthew began to move more freely, his joints loosening from their painful restriction. The doctor, abandoning all pretense of professional detachment, began taking detailed notes. The changes were happening too rapidly, too definitively to be attributed to any natural cause. The tuberculosis that had invaded Matthew's bones seemed to be retreating, like darkness before advancing dawn. Padre Pio then did something unprecedented. He asked Matthew to stand. Sarah gasped, knowing her son hadn't been able to support his own weight for months. But Matthew, with a certainty that seemed to come from somewhere beyond himself, pushed himself up from the wheelchair. His legs trembled but held. The ancient stones of the monastery witnessed what the doctor would later call a direct refutation of everything I thought I understood about medical science. The saint touched each of Matthew's major joints, praying quietly. With each touch, the boy's movements became more natural, more fluid. He took one step, then another. Sister Maria Angelica, who had witnessed many miracles in her years at the monastery, wept openly. Sarah found herself unable to speak, her prayers transforming into tears of gratitude. But it was Matthew's mind that showed the most remarkable transformation. As his body healed, his mathematical insights seemed to deepen. He began explaining to Padre Pio how he now saw divine patterns in everything, in the progression of his disease, in the sequence of events that brought them to Italy, in the timing of the political collapse back home. The saint listened with a knowing smile, occasionally adding insights that left the boy nodding in excited understanding. The session concluded with Padre Pio making a prophetic statement: "Your healing is not just for you. Return to Burlington. Your presence there will be needed as a reminder that justice and mercy are two sides of the same divine equation. The corrupt system is falling, but some souls still need to find their way to redemption." As they left the private chamber, Matthew walked beside his wheelchair rather than sitting in it. The doctor, still furiously taking notes, muttered about needing to completely revise his understanding of what was possible. Sister Maria Angelica simply smiled, having seen yet another confirmation that some truths lie beyond the reach of scientific explanation. The news of Matthew's miraculous recovery reached Vermont with explosive impact. Senator Armstrong, his empire crumbling, launched a final, desperate counterattack. Within hours of the first reports from Italy, Burlington General Hospital released a devastating statement suggesting that Sarah had endangered Matthew's life by taking him overseas, backed by fabricated medical records showing a critical decline in his condition during travel. Dr. Patricia Wells orchestrated a media blitz, appearing on local news stations to express grave concerns about the psychological state of a mother who would risk her child's life for unproven religious treatments. The hospital's PR machine painted a picture of dangerous medical negligence, subtly suggesting that Sarah's actions bordered on child abuse. They released edited versions of Matthew's medical records, carefully selected to support their narrative. The impact on Sarah was severe. Child Protective Services, acting on anonymous concerns, opened an investigation. The Armstrong-controlled local media ran sensationalized headlines questioning her fitness as a mother. But police, still under the senator's influence, issued a statement about considering criminal charges for medical endangerment. The pressure was designed to prevent their return to Burlington. Meanwhile, in Italy, Matthew experienced a temporary but frightening setback. The strain of his rapid healing, combined with the emotional stress of news from home, triggered a fever that alarmed his medical team. Though not as severe as his previous symptoms, the timing was perfect for the Armstrong machine to spin it as proof of their claims. Photos of Matthew during this brief illness, somehow obtained and published without consent, seemed to support the hospital's dire warnings. Dr. Cooper, attempting to defend the Mitchells, found himself facing an emergency medical board review. His credentials were questioned, his judgment attacked, and his career hung by a thread. The young doctor's passionate defense of his actions fell on seemingly deaf ears as the Armstrong-appointed board members prepared to revoke his license. Sarah's remaining allies in Burlington faced intensified pressure. Mrs. Anderson's home was vandalized, though the perpetrators were careful to make it look like random crime. The local church, which had supported their journey, received threats to its tax-exempt status. Even Detective Rodriguez, who had helped build the case against the Armstrongs, was served with internal affairs complaints. The most painful blow came when some of their previous supporters began to waver. Faced with the hospital's seemingly authoritative medical evidence and the threat of legal consequences, several key witnesses recanted their statements about the Armstrong family's corruption. The carefully built case began showing signs of strain as fear once again took hold in Burlington. Thomas Armstrong, despite his earlier confession, was quickly moved to a private facility and emerged with a new statement, clearly crafted by his father's lawyers, claiming that his previous testimony was the result of drug-induced delusions. The media, still largely under the senator's influence, gave prominent coverage to this retraction while burying updates about Matthew's actual condition. The Italian medical team documenting Matthew's recovery found their professional reputations under attack. Articles appeared in medical journals questioning their credibility, and their communications with American colleagues were mysteriously interrupted. The Armstrong machine's reach extended across the Atlantic, attempting to discredit any evidence of the miracle they had witnessed. Sister Maria Angelica, however, remained steadfast. Through secure channels, she sent a message to Sarah: "Remember what Padre Pio said, this trial has purpose. The darkness fights hardest just before dawn." These words would prove prophetic as events moved toward their final resolution, but in that moment they offered little comfort to a mother watching her son's miracle being twisted into a weapon against them. The darkest moments came during those uncertain days in Italy. Matthew's temporary fever, though mild compared to his previous condition, seemed to test not just his physical recovery, but the very foundation of their faith. In their small room near the monastery, Sarah watched her son battle this new challenge, his earlier confidence giving way to moments of doubt. "Mom," he whispered one night, "what if they're right? What if we made a mistake?" The Italian doctors, while maintaining their scientific documentation of Matthew's miraculous recovery, found themselves caught in an international medical controversy. Professional journals that had initially shown interest in publishing their findings suddenly withdrew their offers. Clinical photographs disappeared from secure servers, and test results were questioned by faceless reviewers with obvious political agendas. Back in Burlington, the community split into factions. Church congregations that had united in prayer for Matthew now argued about medical ethics and parental rights. Local newspapers published opposing editorials, some supporting the Mitchells' journey of faith, others condemning it as reckless endangerment. The division cut through families, friendships, and professional relationships, creating wounds that would take years to heal. Dr. Cooper, facing the loss of his medical license, struggled with his own crisis of faith. His detailed records of Matthew's case, the foundation of his defense, vanished from his office during a suspicious break-in. The young doctor found himself questioning everything: his profession, his principles, his decision to help the Mitchells. Only his daily video calls with Sarah and Matthew, seeing the truth with his own eyes, kept him from surrendering to the pressure. The Armstrong machine exploited these moments of doubt masterfully. They released a series of expert analyses suggesting that any improvement in Matthew's condition was likely temporary and potentially dangerous. They painted a picture of irresponsible faith healing that preyed upon desperate parents, using Matthew's case as a cautionary tale. Each news cycle brought new accusations, each more damaging than the last. Sarah's faith faced its greatest test when even Padre Pio seemed distant. The saint, engaged in his own spiritual battles, was unavailable for several crucial days. During this time, Matthew's fever peaked, and the whispers of doubt grew louder. The same halls that had witnessed their miracle now felt cold and empty, echoing with unanswered prayers. The isolation grew more profound as communication with their supporters in Vermont became increasingly difficult. Emails went unanswered, phone calls dropped, and social media accounts were mysteriously suspended. The Armstrong family's influence created a virtual wall between the Mitchells and their home, leaving them feeling abandoned in their moment of crisis. Matthew's mathematical mind, usually his source of comfort, turned to darker calculations. he began computing probabilities of failure, measuring the distance between faith and doubt in numerical terms. His notebook filled with equations that seemed to question the very miracle he had experienced. Everything has a pattern, he told his mother, but what if we're reading this one wrong? The lowest point came when a letter arrived from Child Protective Services, threatening to take custody of Matthew upon their return to Vermont. The legal document, cold and official, detailed a list of alleged negligent decisions that could result in Sarah losing her parental rights. The Armstrong machine had found their most vulnerable point, the bond between mother and son. Yet in this darkness, a strange pattern emerged. Those who visited Matthew, even skeptics, couldn't deny the fundamental change they witnessed. Despite his temporary fever, he could walk, move, and think with a clarity that defied his previous condition. The more the Armstrong machine pushed their narrative of endangered faith healing, the more obvious the disparity became between their claims and the living, breathing evidence of Matthew's transformation. The turning point came from the most unexpected source. Thomas Armstrong, tormented by guilt and unable to maintain the facade, escaped from his private rehabilitation facility during a pre-dawn thunderstorm. Soaked and shaking, he made his way to San Giovanni Rotondo, driven by an inexplicable compulsion to face the truth he had tried to deny. His arrival at the monastery caused a stir. Security personnel, recognizing him from news coverage, initially moved to intervene, but Padre Pio himself requested to see the troubled young man. The meeting lasted for hours behind closed doors where no political influence could reach, no lawyers could intervene, and no spin doctors could reshape the truth. When Thomas emerged, he was a changed man. Without hesitation or legal counsel, he stepped before the cameras that had been tracking his disappearance and delivered a confession that would shatter his father's empire. He detailed not just the night of Matthew's accident, but years of covered-up incidents, altered medical records, and systematic corruption that had protected him from the consequences of his actions. "I saw him walking," Thomas said, his voice breaking as he pointed toward Matthew. "The boy I nearly killed, the one our doctors said would never walk again, I saw him walking in these halls. No amount of money or power can hide this truth. My father's influence can't explain away what I've witnessed here." The confession was streaming live across multiple platforms before the Armstrong machine could react. Social media exploded with the raw, unfiltered testimony of a prodigal son choosing truth over power. Thomas detailed the network of corruption, names, dates, amounts paid for silence, and the intricate system of threats and rewards that had maintained their control over Burlington's healthcare system. More significantly, Thomas revealed the existence of a secret server containing backup copies of every altered medical record, every threatening email, and every fraudulent insurance claim. His father's obsession with maintaining leverage over his allies had created an inadvertent archive of his own corruption. Thomas provided the access codes directly to federal investigators during his live confession. The dam broke. Hospital staff, freed from fear by Thomas's example, began coming forward en masse. Nurses provided hidden copies of original medical records. Administrators revealed recordings of meetings where cover-ups were planned. Even the hospital's IT department stepped forward with evidence of systematic record alterations. Dr. Patricia Wells, seeing the inevitable collapse of the system she had helped maintain, made a desperate attempt to destroy remaining evidence. But she was too late. Federal agents, armed with Thomas's information, had already secured the hospital's servers. Security cameras caught her attempt at digital sabotage, adding obstruction of justice to the growing list of charges. Matthew, watching Thomas's confession from his room near the monastery, showed no surprise. "It's like solving a complex equation," he explained to his mother. "All the variables eventually have to balance. The truth was always going to find its way out. It was just a matter of time and pattern recognition." The Italian medical team seized this moment to release their complete documentation of Matthew's recovery. Their evidence, supported by multiple independent witnesses and irrefutable medical data, provided a stark contrast to the fabricated records that had been used to threaten Sarah's custody rights. The proof of miraculous healing stood alongside proof of systematic corruption, each validating the other. Justice moved swiftly once the truth emerged. Federal agents descended on Burlington General Hospital, their warrants backed by Thomas Armstrong's testimony and the mountain of evidence he had revealed. Dr. Patricia Wells was led out in handcuffs, her carefully maintained facade crumbling before the cameras. The hospital board members who had enabled years of corruption found themselves facing federal indictments. Senator Armstrong's response came too late to save his empire. His attempt to dismiss his son's confession as the ramblings of a disturbed mind backfired spectacularly when Thomas produced video recordings of their private conversations about cover-ups and payoffs. The senator's final press conference, intended to maintain control of the narrative, devolved into chaos when reporters confronted him with evidence from his own secret servers. The transformation of Burlington's healthcare system began immediately. A federal oversight committee took control of the hospital, led by none other than Dr. James Cooper, whose steadfast dedication to medical ethics was now vindicated. The young doctor's first action was to reinstate all medical staff who had been dismissed for questioning the Armstrong family's influence. The legal system, freed from political pressure, moved with unprecedented speed. Judge Crawford's replacement, a no-nonsense federal judge, ordered a comprehensive review of every case involving the Armstrong family. Previous victims of their corruption began receiving calls from the Justice Department, their stories finally being heard without fear of reprisal. Sarah's custody battle transformed into a public vindication. Child Protective Services, under new leadership, formally apologized for their role in the harassment campaign. The same legal system that had threatened to separate her from Matthew now praised her courage in seeking treatment against overwhelming odds. Her journey to Padre Pio was reframed as a mother's extraordinary fight against both disease and corruption. The most profound change came within the Armstrong family itself. Eleanor Armstrong, the senator's wife, following her son's example, came forward with decades of evidence she had secretly preserved. Her testimony revealed how the corrupt system had poisoned not just the healthcare system, but her own family. Her decision to choose truth over power became a symbol of personal redemption. The local media landscape underwent a dramatic transformation. Jessica Martinez was reinstated at the Burlington Daily Press with full editorial control over an investigative unit dedicated to exposing corruption. The newspaper, freed from Armstrong influence, began a series of articles documenting the full scope of the family's former control and the community's journey toward healing. Detective Rodriguez received a promotion to head a new anti-corruption task force. His first case was reviewing all police records involving the Armstrong family, bringing justice to countless victims whose cases had been buried. The evidence he uncovered led to investigations in neighboring states, revealing the true extent of the corruption network. Matthew's recovery, thoroughly documented by the Italian medical team, was published in leading medical journals. The same publications that had refused to acknowledge his case now featured it prominently, accompanied by peer-reviewed analysis of both the medical and ethical implications. Dr. Cooper co-authored several papers, helping bridge the gap between scientific skepticism and undeniable miracle. Burlington's religious community played a crucial role in healing the city's wounds. Father Bennett led interfaith healing services, bringing together those who had been divided by the Armstrong family's influence. The church became a center for reconciliation, where former opponents could find common ground in their shared experience of transformation. Matthew's return to Burlington marked the beginning of a new era for the city. His arrival at the airport, walking confidently down the jet bridge, created a moment of collective awe that no media spin could diminish. The same corridors of Burlington General Hospital that had once witnessed his suffering now echoed with the sound of his steady footsteps as he visited former patients, sharing his story of hope and healing. The transformation went far beyond physical healing. Matthew's mathematical brilliance, once confined to his sick-bed calculations, found new purpose in creating a patient advocacy system that would prevent future abuses. Working with Dr. Cooper, he developed algorithms to detect patterns of medical record alterations and insurance claim irregularities. Every corrupt system leaves mathematical fingerprints, he explained to a captivated audience at the hospital's ethics board meeting. Sarah's experience led to fundamental changes in hospital administration. She was appointed to head a new patient rights committee, ensuring that no family would face the same barriers to treatment that she and Matthew had encountered. Her story became a case study in medical ethics courses, teaching future healthcare providers about the importance of moral courage in the face of systemic corruption. Thomas Armstrong's redemption proved as miraculous as Matthew's healing. After serving a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation, he dedicated himself to exposing corruption in healthcare systems across the country. His first-hand knowledge of how power could corrupt medical institutions made him an invaluable advisor to reform efforts. The boy he had nearly killed became his strongest advocate for redemption. The Mitchell House on Maple Street became a symbol of hope for others facing seemingly impossible battles. Families seeking medical justice or spiritual healing found their way to their door, drawn by the story of a mother's faith and a child's miracle. Sarah and Matthew welcomed them all, sharing not just their experience but the deeper wisdom they had gained about the intersection of faith, science, and human resilience. Dr. Cooper's medical practice evolved to reflect the lessons learned. He developed a unique approach that respected both scientific evidence and the possibility of miraculous intervention. His waiting room became a place where medical charts shared space with prayer cards and where patients could discuss both treatment protocols and matters of faith. The Italian medical team's documentation of Matthew's case sparked a broader dialogue about the relationship between spiritual and physical healing. Their papers, published in prestigious medical journals, challenged the scientific community to expand its understanding of recovery and wellness. Matthew's before and after scans became the subject of intense study, defying conventional medical explanations while demanding scientific acknowledgement. Mrs. Anderson, their elderly neighbor who had stood by them through the darkest times, lived to see her faith vindicated. Her Sunday soup delivery tradition expanded into a community outreach program, providing support to families facing medical crises. Her small acts of kindness, once a solitary protest against corruption, became a model for community care that others eagerly embraced. The gold star flag in the Mitchell's window took on new meaning. It still honored Captain Mitchell's sacrifice, but now it also symbolized another kind of courage, the courage to face down systemic corruption, to hold on to faith when all seemed lost, and to believe in miracles even in the face of scientific impossibility. Visitors to their home often paused before that flag, sensing the layers of meaning it had acquired. Matthew's mathematical insights about patterns and probability found their way into unexpected places. His observations about divine mathematics became part of local church discussions about faith and reason. God's equations always balance, he would say during these sessions. We just need to learn to read them correctly. Burlington's transformation became a blueprint for healthcare reform across the nation. The Mitchell-Cooper Protocol, as it came to be known, established new standards for hospital transparency and patient advocacy. Insurance companies found themselves adapting to a system where profit could no longer overshadow patient care. The ripple effects reached far beyond Vermont's borders, touching healthcare systems across the country. The annual pilgrimage to San Giovanni Rotondo took on new meaning. What began as Matthew and Sarah's desperate journey evolved into a tradition of hope. Each year they led groups of patients and families seeking their own miracles, sharing not just their story but the deeper wisdom they had gained about faith, healing, and perseverance. The monastery welcomed them as living testimony to Padre Pio's continuing influence in the modern world. Thomas Armstrong and Matthew's unlikely friendship became a powerful symbol of reconciliation. Their joint speaking engagements at medical conferences and ethics seminars challenged audiences to reconsider their assumptions about justice, forgiveness, and redemption. Healing comes in many forms, Matthew would explain, and sometimes the greatest miracles are the transformations we can't measure with medical instruments. The scientific community's ongoing study of Matthew's case opened new dialogues between faith and medicine. Research teams from leading institutions documented not just his physical recovery, but the broader impact on the community's healing. Their findings suggested that individual miracles could catalyze systemic change, challenging traditional boundaries between spiritual and social transformation. Sarah's patient rights advocacy extended beyond Burlington. She testified before congressional committees, helping shape legislation that protected families seeking alternative treatments. Her experiences helped bridge the gap between conventional medicine and faith-based healing, establishing protocols that respected both approaches while preventing exploitation of vulnerable patients. Dr. Cooper's integrated approach to medicine gained national recognition. His clinic became a model for combining cutting-edge medical care with spiritual support. Medical students now rotated through his practice, learning to navigate the delicate balance between scientific rigor and open-minded acceptance of unexplainable healing. The Armstrong family's legacy underwent a complete transformation. Eleanor Armstrong, working with Thomas, established a foundation dedicated to exposing and preventing medical corruption. Their insider knowledge of how power could corrupt healthcare systems made them effective advocates for reform. The Armstrong name, once synonymous with corruption, became associated with redemption and positive change. Matthew's mathematical work evolved into a broader understanding of patterns in human experience. His algorithms for detecting corruption found applications beyond healthcare, helping identify systemic abuse in other institutions. Yet he never lost sight of the spiritual dimensions of his insights, often reminding others that numbers are just one way of reading God's language. The gold star in the Mitchell's window became part of local law, its meaning evolving with each retelling of their story. Tour guides pointed it out to visitors, explaining how a fallen soldier's sacrifice connected to his son's miracle and a community's healing. The flag became a symbol of hope for others facing their own battles against seemingly insurmountable odds. As years passed, the true legacy of the Mitchell miracle emerged not in the physical healing alone, but in the lasting changes it inspired. Burlington became known as a city where faith and science cooperated rather than competed, where personal transformation could spark systemic change, and where the possibility of miracles was acknowledged alongside medical expertise. But the final message was clear: true healing touches not just individuals but entire communities, and sometimes the greatest miracles are the changes we inspire in others. The story of Matthew Mitchell's miracle transcends the boundaries between faith and science, corruption and redemption, individual healing and community transformation. It reminds us that true miracles aren't just moments of divine intervention, but catalysts for lasting change. Through Matthew's journey, we learn that patterns of corruption can be broken, that faith can withstand the darkest storms, and that healing comes in many forms: physical, spiritual, and societal. The transformation of the Armstrong family shows us that redemption is possible, even for those who seem furthest from grace. Most importantly, the story teaches us that when one person stands firm in their faith and truth, they can inspire a whole community to find its moral compass. Like Matthew's mathematical equations, life's greatest challenges often find their solutions when we recognize the divine patterns woven through our struggles, our healing, and our collective journey toward justice and redemption. Thank you for joining us for this powerful story of faith, healing, and redemption. If you found Matthew's journey touching and inspiring, please consider subscribing to our channel to support our team's mission of sharing stories that uplift and transform. Share this video with your friends and family, everyone who needs a reminder that miracles still happen in our modern world. Don't forget to like and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how this story touched your heart. And tell us, would you like to hear part 2 of the Mitchell miracle? The story of what happened after their return holds even more surprising twists and profound revelations.